be alive in this land of ours. Good to drive in this land of ours.
Hello, Canada hockey fans in the United States.
The Hockey Time Machine.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Hockey Time Machine. I'm Glenn Dreyfus. Tonight's guest, Wayne Fish, has been covering the Philadelphia Flyers since the mid-'70s. He's written multiple hockey books and now runs a website, flyingfishhockey.com. A couple of years back, another Philly writer, Tom Moore, turned the tables and wrote about Fish, and this is what he said. Journalism may have changed, but Fish hasn't. He's still cranking out clean, precise copy and making tight deadlines. So we welcome to Hockey Time Machine, Wayne Fish. Wayne, thank you for taking the time.
My pleasure.
Wayne, I'd like to read one of your quotes from that Tom Moore article. Quote, "I always wanted to know what makes the athletes tick." And I mean this question sincerely. Did you ever find out?
You know what? To be honest with you, I'm still looking.
As a longtime writer, how do you go about asking the questions that push the right buttons to get a response that isn't the pre-recorded, well, we got a good team, we got a good club?
I think it all comes down to if you know something about the player and something about the history of the franchise, that makes it a lot easier. Each team in the National Hockey League has it's sort of a distinct personality. The Flyers have always been a heart and soul, blood and guts type of franchise, and they're always looking for players like that. So when I talk to players, I ask them, do you think you fit into that mode, to that style, to that credo of, you want to lay it all on the line and you don't hold anything back. You want to go for it. And I think that was set by the teams of the 70s who won the Stanley Cup twice, had a chance to win a third one. And I think that holds true to today, that if you play for the Flyers, you're held to a certain standard. And so that's usually the first question that I ask or questions like that I ask when I first meet a player.
We're not going to try to cram all of 50 plus years of Flyers hockey into 1 hour. So we're just going to ramble incoherently from topic to topic, and we'll see how it goes.
Sure.
As important as any player in Flyers history is longtime owner Ed Snider. In your Flyers book, The Big 50, that you co-authored, you quote captain and later team executive Bobby Clarke as saying, "He treated us as players so much better than all the other teams." What was Snider's philosophy?
I believe that Snider brought to Philadelphia a certain work ethic, a certain he wanted to know the players individually, and he wanted them to know that they were welcome here and that they were trying to build something. And if they were on board with that, then Ed was on board with that, and so were the fans, and so was the city. And so I think that's what Ed was trying to achieve. He was, believe it or not, I think he knew early on that he had the right people in place. And the Flyers, up until till Vegas Golden Knights a couple of years ago when they won the Stanley Cup. The Flyers had the shortest time to win a cup. In other words, they were started in 1967 and won their first cup 7 years later. That record held true until just recently. So Ed built something, and even though he's been gone now for about 8 years, you can still feel that will to want to win and do it the right way. And so to answer your question, he brought more than just, he brought a certain work ethic here. And I think it's just sort of rubbed off on other people.
You mentioned that each team has a personality, and maybe the Flyers' personality mirrors Ed Snyder's personality.
It did. He was a businessman that, I don't want to call him cutthroat, but the man knew how to make a deal. And he didn't go into any deal where he felt that he didn't have an edge. And if he didn't have an edge, he'd find an edge. And so that was crucial. And I covered the team even back to 1971, which was only about 4 years after it was created. And I could feel that even though they didn't have success, they were still trying to set a certain work standard, which Ed almost demanded of his players and of his personnel, his front office personnel. And you could see that. You could feel it when you walked into the room. And I think in some respects, they lost that a little bit when Ed passed, I think 8 or 9 years ago. But now they're slowly getting that back. The people upstairs are letting the hockey people make decisions rather than make decisions upstairs. And that was the way it was with Ed. When Ed came in, he said, Keith Allen, the general manager, and to Fred Shiro later on, he said, you guys do the hockey end of it, and basically I'll do the business end of it. And that's what worked.
About the time you were transitioning to cover the Flyers full-time, they were winning their second of back-to-back Stanley Cups. What do you remember about covering those guys in the 70s?
The story that I wrote the day they won the cup was the fact that they did it their own way. They didn't worry about the fact that they were the Broad Street bullies, that they got in fist fights all the time. And people said, well, they're ruining the sport. It was a gentleman's sport. The Flyers did it their own way. Now, that era is over, but yet there are still some remnants of that in today's game. They sort of brought a certain flair to the game, we're going to beat you any way we can. We'll beat you with skill. We'll beat you with body checking. And if you decide you want to drop the gloves, we'll beat you that way too. And that's what made them so compelling, that they had all of those ingredients, and it really made for some great hockey. I mean, think about this. 1 year in a 40-game home season, they were 36-2-2. That's pretty incredible. I mean, think about it. A season ticket holder went to 40 games. You only saw them lose twice. So that was pretty remarkable.
How much did the Philly flu have to do with that? And if you would, start by explaining what the Philly flu is.
The Philly flu had to do with the fact that teams that came into this building, into the old Spectrum, if they didn't have their skates tied on tight and their gloves ready to drop, they were going to be in some trouble. And the Flyers had Dave the Hammer Schultz. They had Andre DuPont, Moose DuPont. They had Don Big Bird Selesky. They had guys that could fight up and down the lineup, and they were ready to drop the gloves if you just looked at them the wrong way. So I think the fans, to a certain degree, were entertained by this. And let me put it this way. The people who said, no, that's not what we're interested in, I challenge you to look at photographs of the Spectrum from 1973 to 1980 and show me the photograph after a fight broke out, how many fans were not standing. And I can guarantee you this, when we were in the press box, we look around the building, every single person in that building was out of their seat and mesmerized by what was about to take place.
I could have picked any number of 1970s, not only line brawls, but benches clearing brawls. This one is Islanders and Flyers. And to be fair, it wasn't just the Flyers who were involved in this type of hockey in the 70s. But looking back from the perspective of time, Broad Street Bullies, good or bad for hockey? I mean, there's no question it was winning hockey, but did it have adverse effects on, say, kids coming up and trying to emulate the winning players? As a guy from Philly, what's your viewpoint?
Well, I'll start off by saying I was actually from New York and grew up a Ranger fan. So when I came to Philadelphia, I'd already been to Colorado. I went to college there and played a little hockey out there. When I came to Philadelphia, I kind of had this idea that, oh, hockey's played a certain way and this and that. And I was fascinated by what was unfolding in front of my eyes. I was a kid in my early 20s, a young man in my early 20s. And I just sat there and I was staring at this stuff going, what the heck is going on here? But in all fairness, the Flyers were reacting to the big bad Bruins and the bad boy St. Louis Blues. Those guys were beating the crap out of the Flyers. And so Ed Snyder said to Keith Allen, I want some players in here that can fight back. And that's what they got. And for better or for worse, that was sort of their motto, that we're not going to back down. Now, whether or not that was good for hockey, I don't know. I mean, again, there's hockey, college hockey's played a certain way, junior hockey's played a certain way, minor league hockey's played a certain way. But when you get to the top, people expect a show. And although they're trying to legislate fighting out of hockey, I think there's still a place for the occasional fight. So to answer your question, I think that it set a stage for, and it also reflected the times. Don't forget, this was started during the Vietnam War, Watergate, racial tension, and so forth. So it sort of reflected the theme of the times. And as we got back to more of a peaceful time, I think that started to dissipate a little bit.
Speaking about representing the times, January 11th, 1976, the infamous exhibition at the Spectrum between the Flyers and the Russian Red Army team. And this is what you wrote about it. Coach Fred Sherrow and his players beat the Soviets at their own game. Other hockey observers would say the Flyers just plain beat them to the point that the Soviets left the ice for a bit. Where do you think the truth lies?
Somewhere in the middle. Like every time you bring up one thing or the other, not you, but when people bring up whether or not that was a fair way of doing it, the Soviets played the game a certain way, the NHL played the game a certain way, and the Flyers decided to just be themselves and sort of like think outside the box a little bit. And you're right, the Russians did come off the ice. Clarence Campbell, the commissioner, and Ed Snyder went downstairs and basically had a huddle outside the Russian locker room. And basically what they said was, if you don't play, we don't pay. The Russians looked at each other and said, oops, we better go back out there again. And I remember that during that break, writers were allowed to come downstairs and stand outside the locker rooms. And we could hear the yelling going on inside. And it was amazing. It was like, okay, the NHL has lost every single game except one. I believe Montreal tied the Soviets on New Year's Eve or New Year's Day of 1976. And then the Flyers were the only team to go on and beat the Soviets that year. And they did it because they were true to their nature, that they played a rough and tumble style of game. Several players went at it big time, and one of the players got knocked silly, and that's what caused the Russians to leave the ice. After that, the game was a foregone conclusion that the Flyers are going to win that game.
There have been some conspiracy theories coming out of that game. One is the Russians were playing up the fact that they were hurt more than they actually were. Yeah. Another one is that the officials had told the Flyers that go ahead and play your game. We're not going to call penalties. Do you think there's any truth in any of those theories?
There may be some. I mean, it's, again, that game was like what, 50 years ago, close to 50 years ago. So
yeah,
I don't have it, fresh memories of that. I have like bits and pieces of that. But I would say that, yeah, there was probably some politics involved. I mean, we were still in the Cold War. It was still Russia, United States, Canada, Australia, Great Britain, and so forth, the free world against the Soviet Empire. And so that was in Philadelphia, it was sort of billed that way, that, that they were going to have this good guys against the bad guys. And yeah, if the officials looked the other way, they may have looked the other way. But I think that if you look at the videotape of the whole game, the Russians played a certain style that was competitive, especially in the Olympics. They had a national team that played together all year long. They just ran into a Flyers team that was at the peak of its power, and they still talk about it now. I mean, I've done some TV shows where we've gone over that again. It's fascinating to listen and watch.
Now, you alluded to the Flyers going for a three-peat after they'd won the last two Stanley Cups. But this 1976 final between the Canadiens and the Flyers, was it hyperbole that people look back on it and say it was a battle for the soul of the NHL? It was a battle between good and evil, the Broad Street Bullies and the Flying Frenchmen.
I think it's fair to say that in a lot of respects, that's what it was. The Flyers had a very good chance of winning that series if goaltender Bernie Parent, who won the previous two Conn Smythe trophies, hadn't gotten hurt. And so they had to rely on backup goaltending, Wayne Stevenson and so forth. And it really wasn't Bobby Taylor, I think, was involved that year. But, they really had a chance to beat Montreal. But Montreal was a budding dynasty, as we know. They won the next four in a row. I believe I had that right, 76 to 79. So there was that sense of, we want to try to stop this juggernaut from, achieving credibility and achieving greatness. And so, at least in Philadelphia, there was a feeling of, it's us against the rest of the hockey world. And in a sense, I think there were a lot of people in Philadelphia rooting for the Flyers to keep going just for that reason.
Move ahead to 79-80, which you've described as a streak for the ages. 35 straight games for the Flyers without a loss. How do you think that Flyers team stacks up against the other great teams in NHL history?
That's a good question. Again, they caught the Islanders at just like Montreal, later on Edmonton. So you can see a recurring theme here. Each time that they've been to 8 finals and won only 2, because they ran into teams that were just starting to create dynasties. You can even go with the Detroit, like I mentioned, Detroit. I think that there was a sense of the Flyers maybe didn't achieve what they wanted to achieve in that third year. And by the time they got to 1980, they had a good mix of veterans from those teams, about 5 or 6 guys left over from 74, 75, which, by the way, was the last all-Canadian roster to win the Stanley Cup. Every player on the Flyers hailed from Canada. After that, we started seeing Americans and Europeans dot the rosters of the Stanley Cup champions. But that 1980 team had some speed, like Ken Linsman. It had some new guys like Paul Holmgren. And so who knows? I mean, if the Islanders, which had been frustrated for about 3 years prior to that season, weren't in that position, maybe the Flyers win that year. But I would stack that team up against that 1975 or 74 team.
Those cup-winning teams were coached by Freddie Shero, Freddie the Fog, who by 79 had moved on to the New York Rangers. And I was wondering, as a writer, if you were ever able to pierce Freddie the Fog.
I kind of came along as a full-time writer in Freddie's next to last season. I actually started in the middle of a season. And my one full season, he had Pat Quinn as an assistant. And I have to tell you, that got me started on the Pat Quinn fan club. I thought that he contributed a lot to Freddie in those last couple of seasons. And the players had the utmost respect. And Pat, as you know, was the architect and the mentor, the leader of that 1979-1980 streak. But Freddie, he gave some weird stuff. He did some weird things, but at the end of the day, there was a method to the madness. He always tried to get inside the players' heads and motivate them that way. And I can remember one morning we were watching, if you screwed up a drill, he would make you go down to the other end of the ice and do push-ups. And so one day, Moose DuPont messed up a drill. He sends him down the other end of the ice. The other players are milling around the other end of the ice, but they're kind of sneaking a peek to see what Moose is up to. And Moose is half doing these push-ups where his knees are on the ice and he's just lifting his head. And the players are cracking up. And Fred is sitting there with his back to DuPont, and he's looking at the other players, and he knew what was going on, but it formed more camaraderie in that team. They bonded more because Fred, for a moment, was almost being like, I'm one of you guys. And at the end of the day, he could have been a nasty guy and said, all right, I want DuPont to stand in the middle of the ice while everybody else does laps. That's a high school football ploy. Not here. This was more of like, I respect you guys. I know you screwed up, but we once in a while, we're going to turn our back on that, fooling around stuff. And it was a magical moment for me anyway. I remember it to this day, and it was just a regular old everyday practice.
He was ahead of his time in terms of psychology, it sounds like.
Oh, most definitely. I mean, I don't think the Flyers were necessarily the most talented teams when they won those Stanley Cups. I just think that they were thinking like Gretzky does. They were thinking one step ahead all the time. Bob Clark, Bill Barber, Rick McLeish. You could write down the list. Those guys were thinking like a good pool shark. They were thinking 1 or 2 or 3 shots ahead. They weren't just thinking of how can I make this play in this moment, but rather, well, we've done this before. Let's try something different. Let's try something new. And it worked. Lots of times it worked. And the funny thing was, every time that they played a home game in those 2 or 3 seasons, they would be ahead 2 or 3-0 before the people got their popcorn and sat down. It was amazing. They didn't like it.
And wasn't Shero the one who made the famous quote about walking together forever?
Yes. Win today and we walk together forever. And I still bring that up. I can't say enough about this guy. He was just this real different personality, and they called him Freddie the Fog because half the time they thought he didn't know what he was doing. But he was a shrewd guy, shrewd dude, and he studied those videotapes of the Russians. He knew all about how they worked, and to this day now, I mean, the hockey's great. Don't get me wrong. The speed is there, the skill is there, but boy. Once in a while, you say to yourself, these guys don't have what that coach was professing and propagating. He was trying to create more of a skill game and keep other teams guessing what was going to happen. And it's all I can't think of anything else to say about that.
Let's go back to 1980. You mentioned the Islanders, the final, the Flyers and the Islanders. And I don't know if this is a phrase that's uttered anywhere outside of Philadelphia, but I'll ask you, what was the Leon Stickle game?
The Leon Stickle game. I actually had a poster on a wall somewhere. I think I took it down, but there was Game 6 at the New York Islanders, late May 1980. Islanders ahead in the series 3-2. and Leon Stickle missed an offside call by 3 feet. And but maybe we're watching it here. No,
Yeah. This is Gillies passing back over the blue line
by 3 feet, and then the Islanders scored. Yeah, and so that's what caused such a controversy. And maybe you can see it here. Yeah. Yikes! It's worse than I remember. They didn't have review. They didn't have review. Didn't have coaching challenges. Didn't have anything. If they had a coaching challenge, obviously that would have been overturned.
And I'm sure that the Flyers and their fans believe, had the call been correct, that series might have been going back to the Spectrum for a Game 7.
There's not a Flyer on that team from 1980 that doesn't believe if that series, if the Flyers had won that game, they lost it in overtime. Bobby Nystrom 2-on-1 goal in overtime. There's not a Flyer alive today from that 1980 team who wouldn't tell you that if it had gone back to Game 7, the Flyers wouldn't have won that cup. That's how good they were.
And I think Stickle actually admitted he blew it. I mean, what else could he
did.
say?
To his credit, he did.
Yeah. The Flyers actually in that Game 6, they were down 4-2. They made a 2-goal rally to get it to overtime. Were you at that game?
I was at that game. In fact, I have been, if I may be so humble, I've only missed one playoff series, home and road, since 1977. So I pretty much know what I'm talking about, that the Flyers had a real good chance of winning that Game 7. Here's one other interesting little tidbit. The Islanders had 15 power play goals in 6 games. So if we're talking about whether or not one side or the other was getting this favor, or the league wanted a certain team to win or a certain team to lose, just keep that in mind. I think that might still be a record, 15 power play goals in one series.
Do you think because of the Flyers' reputation, either deserved or undeserved, that the league and its referees had them under more scrutiny than other teams?
I don't know about that, because unless you're saying, well, that they had this deep state, dark backroom discussions, I'm not one of those kind of guys. I'm not a conspiracy guy. I think that at the end of the day, maybe the Flyers' physical style of play might have been looked upon as, that a little bit dirty, that they were chipping in those. And Bob Clark's famous line is, if you're not cheating, you're not trying. And so that's pretty much, he took that Russian out, Karmelov out in the Summit Series, slashed him. And that's where his reputation, I believe, started. And he was the chippiest player around. But he didn't have to be chippy in order to beat you. I mean, he was a good player in his own right, and a guy that could beat you with clean hockey. But he wasn't foreign to the idea of occasionally sticking a stick in your poking you in the ribs or whatever. And those guys are the ones that take you off your game. You're trying to mentally focus on playing this certain style, certain way of playing it, and then you get this poke in the ribs, and you look over, and as soon as you look over, he's got you, because now you're off your game. You're thinking about, how am I going to retaliate? How am I going to get even? And I think the league recognized that. They're trying to take some of that little bit of stick in the ribs type of thing. They don't want that, but every player, I think, tries to get a little bit of an edge. And for guys like Clark, it was more of a, let's try to get them off their game.
As the Islanders dynasty begins, the Flyers don't have quite the success in the 80s, at least the first half of the 80s, that they did. Was that a lingering side effect of losing that first playoff series to the Islanders? Was it the fact that some of the 70s champion Flyers weren't on the team anymore? How do you assess the first half of the 80s?
I think that was the case, that you're right, that the Flyers were not the same type of team as they were 73, to 1980, and the drop off was pretty quick. They had some guys that were, getting up there in age a little bit, and so it took a while until Bob Clark retired and became the general manager, and he hired Mike Keenan for the 1984-1985 season. That turned things around quickly, but there were still some players left from those late 70s, early 80s teams that were instrumental. But now you had a guy like Keenan who ruled with an iron fist, and that's exactly what they needed. And Clark was very innovative in terms of making trades, developing players. So, I don't think it was that long a period. It was 81 to 84. And then they turned it around and made the finals twice in 3 years under Keenan.
Since you brought up trades, a couple of other chapters in your book, The Big 50, you devote to the best and worst trades in Flyers history. And you can update that since the book was published if you want. But what would you say are the best and worst deals that the Flyers made?
You're probably going to laugh at this a little bit, but I think one of the best and one of the worst trades was the Eric Lindros trade.
Huh.
And the reason I say it's one of the best is because Eric Lindros brought such a dynamic brand of hockey to Philadelphia that he was the talk of the town, and he got fannies in the seats, and people came to watch him play. And he was an MVP in 95, and he took him to the Cup Finals in 97. So you can't say he was a bust here, but there were problems along the way. He was high maintenance. He got injured quite a bit. And so I think that there are two sides to that trade that, you can make that statement that he could have been the best trade and it could have been the worst trade because of that. Essentially, Peter Forsberg, the main component of the personnel going the other way, won 2 cups with Colorado.
So what could have been with Eric Lindros if he hadn't sustained his concussions?
I think by the time that Scott Stevens laid him out in 2000, things were kind of like beginning to show a little bit of wear and tear, that his time in Philadelphia was beginning to come to a close. Now, it's not to say that if he hadn't been injured, that it couldn't have kept on going. But the rancor between Clark and the Lindros family was a big part of the problem. Eric's parents had a big say in how in his dealings with the Flyers. And that's always a kind of a complicated, and I don't want to say dangerous, but a complex relationship with the Flyers. And if he had just come here and didn't have his mom and dad involved, I think that it may have worked out. I think that they got fairly close in the sense of they couldn't follow up that 97 run to the finals the way that they wanted to. And if they had maybe 1 or 2 more people that were character players on that roster, maybe things would have gone differently. But the fact that they didn't, and then he got that catastrophic hit, which cost him a full year of action, I think that irrevocably, he never played for the Flyers again. And that really was, to my mind, was sad.
Let's talk about that 97, or rather that, let's go back to the 80s, the 85 and 87 runs to the finals. When did Ron Hextall, the goalie, join the Flyers? Was he there for the 85 series?
Yes. No, he was there he was a rookie in 86, 87.
87. Okay. Go ahead.
No, I said he won the Vezina Trophy and I believe, and also the Conn Smythe Trophy, I believe.
Yes, he did. He is one of the most fascinating characters, I think, in Flyers history. He has a complicated history with the NHL, and maybe in some ways in Philadelphia too. He played so well in the 87 series against Edmonton. He did win the Conn Smythe even in a losing cause.
Yes.
He scored 2 NHL goals. He was to coin a phrase, feisty, maybe unhinged at times. And then he had front office stints in both Philly and Pittsburgh. So tell us about all the people who are Ron Hextall.
The one story that jumps out at me, and I'm sort of patting myself on the back a little bit, but we just finished a book with Brian Propp called Angel on My Wing. And it's about his recovery from a stroke in 2015. And he's taken him 9 years to make a comeback. When he first got hurt, he got injured in a very nasty situation. I'm not saying the two events are related, but Brian suffered a big time stroke in 2015, and it's taken him a long time to recover. He had AFib. He went off his medication, and then he suffered a stroke, and he couldn't talk, couldn't walk for a while. Now he's almost completely recovered, and it's miraculous. But anyway, going back to the beginning of that story, in 1989, the Flyers and the Montreal Canadiens met in the Eastern Conference Finals. Chris Chelios, who, as people know, has sort of a borderline hockey personality when it comes to hitting players, meaning that occasionally he'll take the questionable hit. Anyway, in that series, Propp is going into the corner and Chelios blindsides him. Propp hits his head on the stanchion, gets knocked unconscious. They whisk him off to a hospital, and there's rumors going around that he's seriously injured and that he never regained consciousness, that, oh my gosh, this and oh my gosh, that. Anyway, he did recover. He only missed one game, and then he made a miracle comeback and played again. But the feeling was that the Canadiens, and Chelios in particular, were headhunters. And so when time was running out in Game 6 and the Flyers were down by 2 goals, Chelios skated into the corner. Hextall comes out of his net, throws one of his gloves at Chelios, and proceeds to start wailing on him. And the Flyers on the bench were applauding. And Propp was one of the ones who was applauding. And to this day, Propp still resents, and he never got an apology from Chelios for what happened. But the bottom line is Hextall made someone who created havoc accountable for his actions. And that's what, not many goalies would do that, take on a full-size defenseman in the NHL, but he was wailing away on the guy. And so that's the lasting memory that I have, is that he was a stand-up guy. After a game, if he screwed up, he would say, I screwed up. It was my fault. I take all the blame for this loss. And so he's on my top 10 list of guys that I feel were accountable for making themselves accountable. And
do you think if goalies could be captains, that he was captain material?
Yes, you bring up a good point. If there's one guy on the Flyers ever, if there was ever a goalie on the Flyers who could have been a captain, it was Hextall. And he's the same way now as an executive, as a general manager, as a scout, when he was an assistant general manager here, then he was the general manager here. He would give it to you straight. And that's what writers are looking for. They're looking for straight talk. They don't want any fluff. They don't want excuses. All they want is the straight stuff. And he has a sense of humor, a great sense of humor, a sharp, biting, look at this, a biting sense of humor. And, you can make the case that, that his there's the throw there. Yes. Okay. So you're right. I mean, Hextall is beloved in here. And I bet you if in Game 1 of this upcoming season, they brought out Hextall to drop the first puck, he would get a standing ovation.
Do you think his reputation has suffered at all because he didn't have the same success in the front office that he had on the ice?
Good question. I don't know if the right word is suffer, but the word, I guess, is maybe compromised a little bit. That he made some moves that were good, made some moves that were questionable, and he had the Flyers in contention. But I think at the end of the day, he put his faith in a coach that maybe wasn't quite ready. He was I believe the first college coach, going back all the way back to the Pittsburgh Penguin days, of a college coach who had not coached in the NHL yet. So there are some moves that were questionable, but at the end of the day, I still wouldn't mind having that guy. If I were on a team, that's the guy I'd like to have in the front office.
You actually devoted a chapter to Dave Haxtell,
Yeah.
that coach, and he went on to coach the team I cover out here in Seattle, the Kraken. Why didn't it work with Haxtell? And is that an indication that the transition from college to pro hockey isn't usually going to work out?
Yeah, I think you nailed it. That's you're going to have to find a coach who, by hook or by crook, finds success. And Dave did, I think, the first year, right, in Seattle. They made the playoffs, right? Okay. So
his second year. And
second year, okay. Yeah. But point being that they had not had, up to that point, had not had that success. I think the point being that you're going to have a coach who does come out of college and does have success. That will break the barrier. That'll knock down the door. And I think you'll see other college coaches come in, or in junior. There are junior coaches that have coached, but I think the college coaches to this day, it's a different world. You're in college. You have the upper hand. You tell guys what to do, and they go. When they ask you to jump, you say how high. And in the NHL, it doesn't work that way. These guys are making tons of money, a lot more than the coaches are, and they know that the coach's job, the average, 3 or 4 years for a coach in this league, and most players, at least I would say the good ones, 4, 5, 6. So they're going to be around a lot longer than the coaches are. So you go, well, you know what? We'll just wait. And you see that here in Philadelphia now with Tortorella. There are guys who don't like Tortorella, and at the end of the day, it's either you do it his way, or you hit the highway. And so I think that if management is behind the coach, then the player, he's on thin ice.
I was going to ask this question to close our interview, but I'll move it up since you mentioned Tortorella. This is going to be like your doctoral dissertation. Compare and contrast Mike Keenan and John Tortorella.
Wow. I would say this. When Mike was here, he was just out of coaching the junior ranks and I believe college for 1 or 2 years. And he coached the Rochester team. And so he didn't have a platform or any leverage on the players. They came in and basically were thinking, who are you to tell us what to do? Now, Tortorella is exactly the opposite. He has that demanding personality, that bark, that loud bark, and that what are you doing here and all that. But John has won a Stanley Cup. He took Columbus, which had never, had been 1 year, I believe, under Ken Hitchcock, and took them to the playoffs 4 times. And so there was a lot more, he had a lot more power in his resume than Keenan did. But again, I think both of them are alike in the sense of, we don't care what you think of us. We don't care if you think that we're jerks. All we want to do is get the most out of these players. And the players have to respect that. Mark Howe couldn't stand Mike Keenan, but he respected him because he got results. And it's hard to argue with results. Even if you aren't liked, you don't have to be liked. All you have to do is be respected. And that's what I've said for years, even about my work, in that you don't have to like me, but just respect the product. At the end of the day, just acknowledge that it's a system that works. And grudgingly, the players, they'll laugh about Keenan, they'll laugh about Tortorella, but when they get results, that's when the laughter stops.
I don't know whether John Tortorella really dislikes and enjoys demeaning the press, or if that's an act to a certain extent, how do you get along with him, and how would you suggest anyone in the press corps get along with the John Tortorella?
It's like any other coach. If you provoke a coach and start to question his moves and say, well, why didn't you do this? Why didn't you do that? The coach is thinking to himself, who are you to second guess me? What's your qualifications? Well, here, I don't usually ask questions that are going to get a funny look, or what are you asking me, or whatever. I try to pick and choose my spots, and I have big picture question. Like, in other words, I don't ask why did your defense break down in the third period tonight? I'm more like, well, you've been having breakdowns for the last 2 weeks. What's the problem? That's more of the big picture type of thing than just thinking in the moment. I think that John basically knows me, knows who I am, and the fact that I've been around a long time, and that after a while, I try to think questions out thoughtfully so that in other words, they may be a little provocative. They may say, like, well, why did, in the sense of the hidden meaning is, why did you do this? But rather, okay, you're asking me in a nice way, in a respectful way, so I'll give you a respectful answer. The guys who ask those questions right off the bat, I've always said the first question should be, how'd you like the weather today? Warm the coach up. Let him have a little fun, or crack a little joke after a win season. I'm like, boy, that was easy. Why can't you do, just get him warmed up, then throw him the fastball, then hit him with the hard question. So that's sort of my style.
I want to circle back. You mentioned your authorship of the Brian Propp book, and I don't know if it just seems that way, but the Flyers have had at least their share and maybe more of tragedy over their years. Barry Ashby and Pelle Lindbergh and Propp and others. And you also wrote a book with Chris Therien, which I thought must have been a tough one to write. Its subtitle is Road to Redemption, because even though he played several years with the Flyers and then became a broadcaster on radio and TV, the road to redemption concerns his battles with alcohol addiction. What was it like trying to tell that story truthfully, but also compassionately?
I think the biggest part of it is it's a memoir, it's an autobiography, and so a lot of it is in his words. The key for me was that I kept asking him the questions about, I would say he would send me tape. We did it by tape. In other words, he would do a 10-minute recording and then send it to me by computer, and then I would dig it up, and then I would edit it, clean it up. And each chapter I did the title for. The book's title was mine, and I also got Craig Berube to write the foreword. But to answer your question, that we wanted him to, it was almost like a confessional. In other words, what he's saying is, I had this problem. It was worse than you thought. I disguised it so sneakily that I was drinking between periods. I was getting in my flip-flops and going out to my car and taking a shot of vodka, or a couple of shots of vodka in the front seat of the car, retightening the bottle, go back in the locker room, and then I didn't have the shakes anymore. And everyone's like, what? How did we miss this? And the fact of the matter is, he was a functional drunk. So the book is about the fact that he sunk to the lowest thing you can do, which is basically ignore your family. You don't do things the right way. And at the end of the day, finally, someone got a hold of him and said, look, either you stop doing what you're doing or you're going to wind up dead. And that
was Berube, right?
That was Berube. Very good. You read the first chapter forward of that book, which talks about that. And I'm pretty good friends with Craig. We used to run together when he coached, and we play golf and so forth. And you have to keep your distance, because if not, it might affect your writing. If you get too buddy, you have to, be critical at times. But the point being that Craig went to him and said, "Look, either get help or you're going to be in big trouble." You're going to lose your family, and you might lose some other stuff. And so that's what he did. He got into AA. He saw the error of his ways, and now, to his credit, he's been dry for 12 years, maybe 13 years, and he has invested his time and his money into recovery centers in Southeast Pennsylvania, and I can't say enough good things about him. He is as honest as can be since he's recovered from this. And what we try to do is we try to present a model and show it could happen to anybody. And the way to get out of it is you have to get help. You can't do this yourself. It just doesn't work. The strongest personality in the world, it just doesn't work. You have to get help. And you know what? I to this day, I think about, it's been out over 2 years now, and I still think about it. We play golf today, and we were talking about that book. And, you know, I don't know what else to say.
Well, we have to hope that people like Chris telling their stories will help others, because there have to be a lot more stories like his that we don't know.
Oh, there
aren't sure.
The NHL, 3 or 4 guys a year have to take a month off or something to go into rehab, you know. And at the end of the day, you know what? Here's the telling thing. I hate to bring up Twitter, but Chris is in with Twitter and with all the other stuff at Facebook. When the book was finally ready to go, Chris put out there that, you know, we're going to put this book out. 900 people responded, and you should have read some of the responses. My uncle, you know, he's been dry for 7 years. He almost died, and he went into recovery. And then this other guy, you know, my brother, we've had to help him out. You know, he was a war veteran. He came home and he couldn't handle it. You know, and all these testimonials, I guess testimonials is the right word, but I couldn't stop reading. I just couldn't. I had to read every single one. And it just tells you the power of when you play for a professional team, you influence so many young people that are 15, 16, 19 years old, and they're reading this and they're probably, you know, borderline, or they party too much. And hopefully one of them or more got the message, got the clue of, I gotta get this fixed. I can't be doing what he did. And that's what we're trying to do. Get the message out that if you feel like you're doing too much of this or whatever, seek out help. There are people that can help you out with it.
To my mind, people like Chris Therien and Clint Malarchuk is another example, talking about his OCD. These are more heroic acts than anything they've done on the ice or that other athletes have done on the field. As you say, they impact lives, and they give permission for other people to say, okay, if he can admit it, I can admit it. And we know that's the first step to getting help.
That is. And you know what? Like anything else in society and in life, you've got to shine light on it. If something is lurking in the shadows, the only way you can get out of that, shine a light on it. And that's what this whole thing was about, trying to shine a light on a problem, and then also offering the solutions, the way to fix it. And you know what? At the end of the day, it's not about Chris per se. He has 4 kids. He has 3 daughters who are all-American basketball players and so forth, and a son who's 6'5" and playing football. And you have to, for them, the fact that he is showing his children that, I know I screwed up and I wasn't the father I wanted to be, but now, damn it, I'm going to go out and be the father I was supposed to be. And if I can make up time, I will do that. And I went down to Chris's house one day. There were a couple of the kids were there. His wife was there and so forth. And I could sense there was a hopeful atmosphere in that room of, you know what, we're on board with this. If he really means business, if he really is really going to follow this through, and like with the book and all that, then we're heartened, we're encouraged, and we have faith in him. But I walked out of that room, I was like blown away. I couldn't believe it. Wow. I mean, this is real life. This is not some TV show. I'm in a real life situation, and it was very encouraging. And nothing's changed in that last 2 years since then. Nothing has changed my mind about that situation.
Terrian courageously wanted to tell his story. As a journalist, how do you decide when you're going to tell a story and whether something you find out isn't for publication?
There were stories that we left on the floor, as they say in editing, that were cut. And they were some things not risque, but rather they were belittling and demeaning to people that he perhaps didn't like so much. And there's a temptation to do that. And I said, you know what? Don't do that. Don't go in that direction. I mean, if you got a bone to pick with somebody, pick up the phone and call them and have it out. Have a shouting match, shake hands, and get it over with. This idea of trying to belittle somebody, the Brian Propp, Chris Chelios thing is different. That was bodily harm. That was criminal in my mind. But here, this is just personality conflict. This is just people not getting along or telling stories about other people. And at the end of the day, work that out. There's a couple of stories. I'm not going to mention what they are, but he had a personal or another player. He's talking about a player who had an issue with a coach, and that stuff should stay behind behind locker room doors. If he insisted on it, I would say, look, find yourself another author. I'm not into that business, that tattletale gossip BS. I'm not into it at all. You know what? The story has to have some redeeming value. It has to be on topic. We're talking about alcohol abuse here, and you're talking about some guy who's got a problem with a coach and is acting like a jerk, and doing stuff that's kind of jerky. That's not germane. It's not relevant to what we're talking about. Keep it on topic. So there was some stuff that got dropped out of the book. But at the end of the day, I'd say 90-something% was all good.
And there must have been other stories in your long career where you said, you know what? I don't need to expose that to the world.
Yeah, there are. I mean, face it, life on the road. There's no secret there that hockey players, when they're left, a 24-year-old is on the road in a hotel and
with a lot of money and fame and good luck.
And you can use your imagination how that goes. And at the end of the day, I'm not going to put that out there and say, oh, I know this, I saw that. I'm not that type of guy, or even imply that. I love stuff like where Kjell Samuelsson had a tremendous dry sense of humor. One time, after he got traded to the Penguins, they were on the roads of their 92 Cup. They had played the Rangers, I think, in the first round or second round. So I went up there to cover that series, and I walked into the locker room. Him and Taka had been in the trade too, and I believe it was for Recchi. And Samuelson's untying his skates, and he looks up at me. He goes, "What are you doing in here?" And I cracked up. I literally dropped my pad and literally laughed out loud. And Taka's got this wry grin on his face. And so the stories I like to tell of the reference of it and the fact that it just fits Samuelson's personality. I mean, those are the kind of stories I like to tell.
Couple of last questions. The Flyers-Penguins rivalry, because you mentioned Samuelsson, is that underappreciated outside of Pennsylvania?
Yes. Yeah, we call it the Battle of Pennsylvania. I didn't come up with that line, but it's called the Battle of Pennsylvania. And essentially, I mean, you have the hit. You had several incidents where things got a little bit out of control. Lindros got hurt on that one play in against the Penguins. Yeah, there you go.
I mean, this is the 2012 series.
Yeah.
When, I mean, you want to talk about entertaining, all hell broke loose.
Yeah. It has to do with the fact that I guess that we're in the same state, and the fact that Mario Lemieux kind of got the upper hand on the Flyers during his era, and the Flyers beat up. At one point, the Flyers, I believe, were third in the 70s and 80s when the Penguins were bad, had gone 39 games in a row over like a 17-year period without a loss. Now, if it doesn't build up resentment, I don't know what does. So at the end of the day, the Penguins felt justified to rub the Flyers' noses in it when they got really good, especially in the early 90s when they won the Cups with Mario and that crew. But I would have to say it's good for the sport. It's good for Pennsylvania. It's good for the two franchises. And I think that behind closed doors, they all get a kick out of this Battle of Pennsylvania stuff.
One more name to throw at you. Who is Dave Leonardi?
Oh, Sign Man.
Yeah.
Yeah, Sign Man. Some of the there it is. We're going to do it. Insert here. You have that one? Let's see. There's one where he stands behind the goal and says, "Insert here." Well, that's sort of like it. The puck stops here. Let's see.
I saw he had like a binder of like hundreds of these.
Yes, the best one is "Insert here," but I don't. But anyway, Start the Bus. That's a good one. Yeah. It was just a wild time, and the fans respond to it tremendously. Gene Hart, I believe, was a friend of his, became friends with him. And so Gene would mention it on the broadcasts. They would show the signs, and then Gene would make a wisecrack or say something funny in response to that. And so it just became almost like a tradition.
Let's close with a plug for Flying Fish Hockey. Tell me about the website and your adventures in new media.
Yeah. When I first started this about 7 years ago, a friend of mine, a running friend of mine, I enlisted his help to get this thing off the ground. And basically what I wanted to do was supplement my coverage originally in the Bucks County Courier-Times. Now I'm with the Allentown Morning Call, which is a city north of Philadelphia, about an hour's drive north. And they're on the edge of the Flyers, I would say the fan base. And so I try to give them everything that I did for the Bucks County Courier-Times, which changed ownership in 2017. I felt that it was time for me to explore new avenues like the books that you mentioned. I write for the Hockey News. I do some radio and so forth. The point being that the website itself gives me the freedom to both write on the spot. I posted something yesterday about Ryan Johansson, the player who came over in the Sean Walker deal last year from the Colorado Avalanche, and he had an $8 million price tag and a bad hip. So the Flyers parted ways with him by claiming breach of contract. I don't know if that's going to be challenged or not. But
I think the PA is already challenging.
Yeah, I think I just don't know if it's been filed or whatever. But my point being that I can be a little more free to write what I want. And it also has that immediacy of that. I was funny. I got that text and I had it posted up online in about 30 seconds. And looking back now, I looked it up. I think I was the fastest one to have it out there. So that it gives me that, 10 years ago, we didn't have all this. Now we have the technology to do that. Then I can come back with a full-blown story. And also I can write my Sunday column and kind of, extrapolate that and give my opinion on whether or not it was a good move. So yeah, the website is fun. It's informative and it gives me credibility. And here, I'll give you a real quick example.
Yeah. 2
years ago or a year ago, the neck guard, remember the young man died from the cut on the neck. I believe he was.
Yes, and certain players in the NHL, a few are using those.
The Flyers had 3 or 4 guys, Konechny, Sanheim, and I believe one other. Anyway, I took a photograph and posted it of him wearing the neck guard in practice. And the next day I put it on, I put it on Twitter and so forth. that got 205,000 responses. And that, I mean, a good day is 1,000 or 3,000, but 205,000 shows you that the word gets out quickly. And so that's what you're looking for, clicks. You're looking for eyes to hit the site. And for me, that's rewarding, because I don't even know if when I was at my peak 10, 20, 30 years ago, whatever it might be, there wasn't that kind of exposure. I mean, you were in a newspaper, but who knows if people actually read that, even read the sports section? I don't know. But you have people saying, yeah, I looked at it, I read it, or they offer opinions. And I love that interaction with the fans. I like to hear what they have to say, and then I respond and so forth. It's kind of a cool thing.
And it's only like 43 more years or 53, and you'll be able to write your big 100 book.
Oh man, I you know what, I think about that, and I'll be this is my 49th season coming up, so of course everyone keeps saying, "Are you going to do 50? Are you going to do 50?" I'm saying, like, well, I didn't do 48 just to do 49 and then call it. So I'm going to do. I believe that my wife and I will sit down and have a discussion about that. I can see myself, the guy that wrote for the Inquirer, Sam Carchidi, is doing what I think I may evolve to, which is write books, do a TV. He's actually doing a TV series, and hopefully for NBC, about the Broad Street Bullies for their sports network. And that's the kind of work that I'm kind of gravitating for. I still do the daily grind, but I'm moving farther and farther away from that and more toward the books and magazines, because I've always been a long form journalist. I'm not writing the day-to-day, every day, day after day stuff and try to making it important. To me, it's like we're talking with each other right now about books. That's what kind of gets me going.
Well, you're still a spring chicken as far as I'm concerned. I don't think you've lost anything off your fastball, Wayne. It has been fascinating talking to you. If it was up to me, I'd do it for another 8 or 9 hours. But I thank you so much for the hour you've given us and all the history we've revisited. I know we just kind of scratched the surface, but it's been a lot of fun, and I thank you.
Thank you, Glenn, for having me on. It was a treat to you actually brought back some memories for me that I hadn't thought about for a while, but it was a lot of fun. So I really appreciate it.